The Omega quietly sacrificed everything for the Alpha King, but all she received was his coldness. How much could someone quietly sacrifice before being noticed? And why would the person she gave everything for respond with nothing but coldness? If heartfelt werewolf stories about loyalty, sacrifice, and unforgettable emotions are your favorite, subscribe and turn on notifications for more. Tell us in the comments, do you believe true sacrifice should always be recognized, or can it remain unseen? Now, step into a kingdom where silent devotion and quiet distance begin a journey that will change more than anyone could ever imagine. The saddest sacrifices are the ones that become invisible because they happen every single day. Before the first rays of sunlight reached the highest towers of Mooncrest Citadel, Olivia Brooks was already awake. Wrapped in a simple charcoal gray cloak over her modest ivory dress, the young Omega quietly crossed the silent palace corridors carrying a woven basket filled with freshly gathered herbs from the royal gardens. She moved with practiced grace, stopping first at the royal kitchen where she prepared a calming herbal tea that the Alpha King always drank before attending the morning council, although he had never asked who placed it there. From the kitchen, she continued to the western garden, trimming faded roses before the palace guests would arrive, carefully removing fallen leaves one by one until every pathway looked untouched by the previous night's storm. The servants greeted her warmly because they had long learned that the palace became brighter whenever Olivia smiled. Yet none of them truly understood how many small burdens she quietly carried every single day. While the kingdom admired Alpha King Nathan Walker for his wisdom and strength, Olivia worked behind the scenes making certain that countless unnoticed details never became problems. She remembered the birthdays of elderly servants, replaced torn blankets before winter arrived, organized forgotten royal records after midnight, and quietly delivered medicine to children in nearby villages whenever the palace physicians became overwhelmed. She never signed her name beside good deeds. She simply believed kindness did not require recognition to remain meaningful. By the time the great bronze bell announced the beginning of another royal morning, Nathan had already entered the grand council chamber. Dressed in an elegant black cloak embroidered with silver, he stood before advisors discussing harvest reports, trade routes, and border agreements with calm confidence. Every document he requested had already been arranged upon the polished oak table exactly where he expected to find it. Every schedule flowed perfectly. Every meeting began on time. To Nathan, the smooth rhythm of palace life felt completely ordinary. He never paused to wonder who quietly protected that rhythm from falling apart. When the council session ended, Olivia arrived carrying additional reports gathered from village representatives during the previous evening. She placed the leather folder neatly beside Nathan before stepping back with a respectful smile. Without looking up from the pages before him, Nathan simply nodded once. "Leave them there," he said politely. His words contained no anger, yet no warmth either. Olivia softly answered, "Of course, Your Majesty," before leaving the chamber as quietly as she had entered. She did not expect gratitude. Even so, a small part of her heart still hoped that someday he might truly see her instead of merely noticing the work she completed. Throughout the afternoon, she continued moving across the castle, helping the palace librarian restore damaged books, comforting a frightened young servant on her first day, and carrying fresh flowers to brighten the room of an elderly cook recovering from illness. Everywhere Olivia went, people felt lighter after she left. Everywhere except beside the one person for whom she willingly sacrificed the most. As evening settled across Mooncrest Kingdom, Nathan stood alone upon the western balcony watching the sun disappear beyond distant mountains. A cool breeze carried the fragrance of blooming roses from the gardens below, yet he scarcely noticed it. Behind him, the cup of herbal tea Olivia had prepared that morning rested empty upon his desk, another quiet kindness. Accepted, without thought. Far beneath the fading golden sky, Olivia watered the final row of roses before gathering her basket and walking slowly toward the palace, never realizing that every unnoticed sacrifice was quietly planting the seeds of a truth that would one day change both her life and the heart of the Alpha King forever. Every evening, when the last palace lanterns began glowing beneath the deep blue sky, Olivia Brooks quietly started another part of her day that almost no one ever witnessed. While the royal court celebrated another successful council session and noble families gathered inside the grand dining hall, the young Omega carried a small lantern through the peaceful corridors of Mooncrest Citadel, checking every corner that others considered unimportant. She visited the elderly palace librarian, whose eyesight had grown weaker with age, carefully returning hundreds of books to their proper shelves before dawn so that the scholars would never notice the work had been done. She quietly repaired torn pages using delicate strips of parchment and natural adhesive. She prepared herself, believing that preserving knowledge mattered just as much as protecting people. Later, she crossed the moonlit courtyard toward the small infirmary, where the palace physician rested after treating patients throughout the day. Without disturbing anyone, Olivia organized fresh herbs, replaced empty medicine jars, and prepared healing mixtures for the following morning so the physician could begin caring for patients immediately after sunrise. The doctor often wondered why every difficult morning somehow became easier before he arrived, never realizing that someone else had quietly carried part of his burden through the night. Before returning to her own room, Olivia always stopped outside the royal kitchen to leave baskets of fresh vegetables and herbs collected from the palace gardens earlier that afternoon. The head cook smiled every morning when discovering everything perfectly prepared, assuming the younger servants deserved the credit. Olivia never corrected the misunderstanding. She simply enjoyed knowing that another day inside the palace could begin. Peacefully, beyond the castle walls, her quiet kindness reached even farther. Whenever merchants arrived from nearby villages carrying news of struggling families, Olivia personally prepared blankets, dried herbs, and simple food supplies before asking trusted palace messengers to deliver them anonymously. She remembered the names of children she had met during village visits months earlier and quietly asked whether they had recovered from illness or whether elderly couples had enough firewood before winter arrived. To Olivia, every person mattered regardless of whether they ever learned who had helped them. Meanwhile, Nathan Walker continued leading the kingdom with discipline and unwavering dedication. Every decision he made sought to strengthen Mooncrest Kingdom, and every success reinforced his belief that efficiency and responsibility alone kept the palace running smoothly. When advisors praised the flawless organization of royal affairs, Nathan accepted their compliments politely without considering the countless unseen hours that had made such order possible. During one particularly demanding afternoon, a senior advisor complimented the remarkable condition of the palace gardens before suggesting that the groundskeepers deserved additional funding. Nathan agreed immediately, unaware that Olivia herself had spent months restoring nearly every neglected flower bed after finishing her regular duties. As the meeting ended, he passed Olivia in the corridor carrying another basket filled with herbs and neatly folded documents. Without slowing his pace, he offered a courteous nod. "Thank you," he said absent-mindedly, assuming she had simply completed another assigned task. Olivia returned the same gentle smile she always wore. "I am glad everything is ready for tomorrow, Your Majesty," she answered softly. Nathan continued walking without noticing the quiet exhaustion hidden behind her calm expression. That evening, as rain gently tapped against the palace windows, Olivia remained awake organizing emergency supply records for villages vulnerable to the coming winter storms. Candlelight flickered across stacks of handwritten notes, while the castle around her slowly fell asleep. She paused only once to rub her tired eyes before continuing her work with patient determination. Outside her small window, the first cold wind of the season stirred the branches of the ancient oak trees surrounding Mooncrest Citadel. Somewhere high above the sleeping kingdom, clouds quietly gathered across the night sky, carrying with them the first signs that even the strongest heart could not continue giving everything forever without eventually paying a price that no one had yet begun to notice. 3 mornings later, something changed so quietly that almost no one recognized its importance at first. Olivia Brooks did not appear before sunrise in the Western Gardens. The dew remained untouched upon the roses. Fallen branches still rested along the stone pathways after the previous night's wind, and the familiar basket usually waiting beside the herb beds never arrived. The elderly gardener looked around with growing concern before deciding to begin the work himself, but his slower pace left much unfinished before the palace awakened. Inside the royal kitchen, the head cook frowned when he discovered empty shelves where fresh herbs normally waited each morning. Young servants hurried through the pantry searching for ingredients that had always seemed to appear effortlessly. In the infirmary, the palace physician paused in surprise after finding several medicine jars empty and stacks of patient records still waiting to be organized. Nothing had gone terribly wrong. Yet everywhere, the smooth rhythm everyone had quietly depended upon seemed strangely uneven. Olivia remained inside her modest room resting beneath a warm blanket after the physician gently insisted that exhaustion had finally caught up with her. She had worked through too many nights and ignored too many signs that her own strength required care as well. Even while resting, she worried about unfinished responsibilities rather than herself. She quietly apologized to the physician for creating inconvenience, earning only a patient smile in return. "The palace will survive one morning without you," he assured her kindly. Olivia lowered her eyes, uncertain whether she believed those words. Meanwhile, Nathan Walker began another demanding day of royal meetings. Before the first council session, he instinctively reached for the calming herbal tea that always waited beside his desk. The cup was missing. Assuming someone had simply forgotten, he continued reading official reports without mentioning it. Later that morning, a village representative arrived carrying incomplete agricultural records because several supporting documents had not yet been organized inside the archives. The meeting required unexpected delays while royal clerks searched through files that Olivia normally arranged before anyone arrived. Nathan noticed the interruptions but attributed them to ordinary human error. By afternoon, small inconveniences had quietly multiplied. The royal library requested additional time locating historical treaties. The palace kitchen served lunch nearly half an hour later than scheduled. A shipment of winter blankets waited unopened because no inventory list had been prepared. None of these problems threatened the kingdom, yet together they created an unfamiliar feeling that something invisible had slipped out of place. As Nathan walked through the western courtyard after the final meeting, he slowed almost without realizing why. The rose garden looked different. Several flowers had begun to wilt beneath the unusually warm afternoon sun, and the stone fountain lacked the fresh blossoms that had decorated it every day for as long as he could remember. The elderly gardener respectfully approached with tired eyes. "We shall have everything restored soon, Your Majesty," he said. "Miss Olivia has been resting these past few days." Nathan stopped walking. "Resting," he repeated quietly. The gardener nodded. "She finally became exhausted. Truthfully, I have wondered for years how she managed everything she quietly carried." Nathan remained silent for several moments before looking once more across the garden. For the first time, he realized he could not remember ever asking Olivia whether she herself was well. That evening, as soft rain began falling across Mooncrest Citadel, Nathan stood beside the palace window watching tiny drops ripple across the silent garden paths. Somewhere within the castle, Olivia rested for the first time in years. Everywhere else, the palace continued discovering just how much of its quiet strength had always belonged to the one person who had never asked anyone to notice. The following morning, Captain Lucas Harper arrived at the Royal Archives expecting another ordinary day of reviewing trade records before the Winter Council convened. Instead, he found the elderly chief archivist standing beside several shelves with an expression of quiet concern. Stacks of ledgers that normally appeared neatly arranged remained scattered across the long oak tables, while unfinished correspondence rested beside half-organized tax reports. Lucas offered to help before noticing dozens of small handwritten notes tucked between the pages of official records. Curious, he opened one at random. In careful handwriting, someone had written reminders about missing village census reports, overdue repairs to a northern bridge, and recommendations for elderly citizens who needed additional firewood before the first snowfall. None of the notes carried a signature. The chief archivist smiled gently. "Those are hers," he said. Whenever she discovered a problem, she solved half of it before bringing it to anyone else's attention. Lucas looked up. "Olivia?" The old man nodded. For years. As the morning continued, Lucas quietly followed the trail those notes revealed. Every solved problem seemed to lead back to the same person. Forgotten tax records had been restored before causing confusion. Village requests had quietly reached the proper departments before becoming emergencies. Damaged maps had been repaired. Historical documents had been preserved. Even the royal council schedules contained subtle adjustments that prevented conflicts no one else had ever noticed. None of the improvements had been announced. None had been credited. They simply existed because Olivia Brooks had quietly refused to let disorder grow into hardship for someone else. Later that afternoon, Lucas visited the palace kitchen where the head cook laughed softly while remembering how Olivia always arrived before sunrise, carrying baskets of herbs, fresh vegetables, and handwritten suggestions for meals suitable for elderly servants recovering from illness. The physicians shared similar stories, explaining that many of the healing supplies used throughout the palace had been prepared long before anyone realized they would be needed. The librarian admitted that priceless historical books remained preserved only because Olivia spent countless evenings repairing fragile pages after completing every other responsibility. Everywhere Lucas went, another quiet story emerged, each one revealing another unseen sacrifice hidden beneath ordinary days. As sunset painted the castle walls with warm amber light, Lucas carried a growing collection of handwritten records toward Nathan Walker's private study. He did not intend to criticize the Alpha King. He simply believed that certain truths deserved to be seen. Nathan welcomed him inside, expecting another military report. Instead, Lucas gently placed several journals, letters, and anonymous notes across the polished desk. "Your Majesty," he began respectfully, "I believe these belong together." Nathan opened the first journal. Inside were carefully organized lists describing repairs completed without request, supplies quietly delivered to struggling villages, recommendations for servants needing assistance, and dozens of observations about improving palace life. Every page reflected remarkable attention to others. None mentioned personal recognition. Nathan turned another page, then another. The handwriting remained consistent throughout hundreds of entries. At last he looked toward Lucas. "Who wrote all of this?" Lucas answered without hesitation. "Olivia Brooks." Silence settled over the room. Nathan slowly lowered his eyes to the journals once more, noticing that many entries ended with the exact same sentence written almost like a personal promise. "If tomorrow becomes easier for someone else, then today was well spent." Nathan repeated those words quietly beneath his breath. They lingered in the room long after the sound of his own voice disappeared. Outside the palace windows, evening shadows stretched across the western gardens where autumn roses continued waiting for the gentle hands that had faithfully cared for them through every changing season. For the first time in many years, Nathan began wondering not what Olivia had accomplished, but how many sacrifices had remained completely invisible simply because she had never wanted anyone to see them. The next several days unfolded like pages from a book Nathan Walker had somehow lived without ever truly reading. Every conversation revealed another quiet chapter of Olivia Brooks's life that had remained hidden behind ordinary moments. The elderly housekeeper remembered the harsh winter 3 years earlier when several palace servants quietly lost family members to illness. Before anyone else noticed their grief, Olivia had arranged rotating work schedules so they could spend time with loved ones without losing their wages. She never informed the royal council because she believed compassion did not require official approval when someone's heart was breaking. The stable master smiled warmly as he recalled finding fresh grain and medicine for exhausted horses after every difficult journey, always appearing before sunrise with no explanation of who had delivered them. The youngest kitchen servant admitted that she would have abandoned palace life during her first frightening week had Olivia not patiently stayed beside her each evening, teaching recipes, encouraging confidence, and quietly replacing every meal the young woman accidentally ruined before anyone discovered her mistakes. One by one, stories continued filling the halls of Mooncrest Citadel, each revealing another invisible act of kindness woven into the daily life of the kingdom. Nathan listened carefully, without interrupting. Every memory felt strangely familiar, Not because he remembered witnessing them, but because he had unknowingly lived inside the peaceful world Olivia had quietly created around everyone else. That realization settled heavily upon him. He had admired the harmony of his kingdom while overlooking the person who protected so much of that harmony with gentle consistency. Later that afternoon, Lucas Harper invited Nathan to visit the Western storehouse where emergency supplies had always remained remarkably organized despite frequent seasonal demands. The elderly quartermaster greeted them before opening several carefully labeled cabinets. Blankets, preserved food, herbal remedies, lantern oil, children's clothing, and farming tools stood neatly arranged with handwritten inventory lists updated months in advance. She prepared these every season, the quartermaster explained. Whenever storms delayed merchants or harvests became uncertain, villages already had what they needed because Miss Olivia quietly anticipated problems long before they arrived. Nathan gently picked up one of the inventory journals. Between lists of supplies, Olivia had written small reminders beside certain village names. Mrs. Henderson prefers lavender tea. The Miller twins have outgrown last winter's boots. Deliver extra blankets to the Harper family before the first frost. None of the notes concerned royal affairs. They simply reflected how deeply she remembered ordinary people. As evening approached, Nathan wandered alone through the western gardens where autumn sunlight painted the roses with soft golden light. The flowers had begun recovering since Olivia returned to light duties, yet many blooms still waited patiently for the careful attention only she seemed able to give them. He paused beside a weathered wooden bench overlooking the fountain. The elderly gardener slowly approached, carrying a basket of trimmed branches before quietly sitting beside him. After a long silence, the old man spoke with gentle honesty. "Your Majesty, she has never asked anyone to notice her sacrifices. She only hoped they help someone smile tomorrow." Nathan lowered his eyes toward the stone pathway where scattered rose petals rested after the afternoon breeze. "Why did she never tell me?" he asked softly. The gardener offered a kind smile touched with quiet sadness. Because to her, love was never something meant to be counted. She believed it was something meant to be given. Those simple words echoed inside Nathan long after the gardener returned to his work. As twilight settled across Mooncrest Kingdom, Nathan remained alone beneath the fading sky, finally understanding that the greatest distance between two hearts is not created by anger, but by quietly accepting another person's devotion until it becomes almost invisible. Late that evening, long after the final council meeting had ended, Nathan Walker found himself standing outside the quiet corridor that led to Olivia Brooks's modest room. The palace had fallen into peaceful silence, and only the warm glow of lanterns reflected across the ancient stone walls. He had walked these halls countless times before, yet never once had he wondered what life looked like behind the simple wooden door where Olivia returned each night after carrying the burdens of everyone else. He hesitated before gently knocking. Receiving no answer, he noticed the elderly housekeeper approaching with a basket of freshly folded linens. She smiled kindly and explained that Olivia had gone to the Western Gardens for a short walk after finally regaining enough strength to leave her room. Nathan quietly thanked her, but before turning away, his eyes settled upon a small wooden shelf just inside the open doorway. Several neatly arranged journals rested beside a simple clay vase holding fresh wildflowers. The housekeeper noticed his curiosity and softly said, "She always writes before sleeping. It helps her remember the people she wishes to help tomorrow." Nathan slowly opened the first journal. Instead of personal dreams or complaints, every page contained careful notes about others. One entry reminded her to ask whether the palace baker's daughter had recovered from a fever. Another listed supplies needed for an elderly couple living near the eastern forest. Several pages described improvements for the orphanage roof before winter snow arrived. Nathan continued reading in growing silence. There were no records of sacrifices made for herself, no mention of loneliness, and no criticism toward anyone who had overlooked her efforts. Then he reached a page written only a few weeks earlier. The handwriting remained steady despite visible signs of exhaustion. His responsibilities become heavier every season. "I hope tomorrow feels a little easier for him than today." Nathan stared at the sentence for a long time before realizing she had been writing about him. There was no expectation hidden within those words, no request for appreciation, only sincere hope that his burden might become lighter. He gently closed the journal, feeling an unfamiliar weight settle inside his own heart. Leaving the room, he quietly walked toward the western gardens where moonlight bathed the stone pathways in soft silver light. Olivia sat alone beside the fountain, carefully trimming a few damaged rose branches that had bent beneath the recent storms. Even after everything, she had returned to caring for the flowers before thinking of herself. Nathan stopped several feet away, uncertain how to begin a conversation that should have happened years earlier. Olivia looked up and greeted him with the same gentle smile she had always offered. "Good evening, Your Majesty," she said softly. Nathan noticed how naturally those words came despite everything she had quietly endured. He sat upon the weathered wooden bench nearby, neither of them speaking for several peaceful moments while the fountain echoed through the quiet garden. At last, Nathan broke the silence. "I have spent years believing I understood everything happening inside this palace." Olivia continued arranging the roses before answering calmly. "Leadership asks people to see many things at once. Sometimes that makes the smallest things difficult to notice." Nathan lowered his eyes, recognizing that she had spoken without accusation. Her kindness somehow made his regret feel even greater. The fragrance of blooming roses drifted gently through the cool evening air as he finally understood that distance between two people is rarely created in a single moment. More often, it grows quietly through countless ordinary days when gratitude remains unspoken and kindness is accepted without truly being seen. As the moon climbed higher above Mooncrest Citadel, Nathan realized that discovering the truth about Olivia's sacrifices was only the beginning. The far more difficult journey would be learning whether a heart left waiting for so long could ever believe that it was finally being seen. The following morning arrived. Wrapped in gentle spring sunlight that spilled across the western gardens of Mooncrest Citadel, turning every dew-covered rose into a tiny reflection of gold. Nathan Walker returned to the garden earlier than usual, carrying no royal documents and wearing only a simple black cloak instead of the formal garments reserved for court. For the first time in years, he had postponed the opening council session by an hour, quietly instructing his advisors that another matter required his full attention. Olivia Brooks was already there, kneeling beside a bed of white roses with a small basket resting beside her. She carefully removed damaged leaves while humming a melody so soft it blended naturally with the sound of birds greeting the morning. Nathan paused several steps away, watching the peaceful scene with emotions he struggled to describe. It suddenly became impossible to imagine how many mornings had begun exactly like this, while he remained unaware that someone had been quietly carrying so much of the kingdom upon her own shoulders. Olivia noticed him and stood with her familiar, gentle smile. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she said warmly. Nathan returned the greeting before looking around the garden. Every flower seemed healthier than the day before, and the pathways once again reflected the careful attention only she seemed able to provide. "You returned to work sooner than you should have," he said with quiet concern. Olivia glanced toward the blooming roses before answering. "The flowers have been waiting patiently. They deserved a little care." Nathan lowered his eyes, realizing that even now she spoke first about the needs of others. After a long silence, he finally gathered the courage to say the words that had remained trapped inside his heart since reading her journals. "I owe you an apology." Olivia looked at him calmly, but did not interrupt. Nathan continued slowly, choosing every sentence with care. "For a long time I believed this kingdom stood strong because everyone simply fulfilled their responsibilities. I never stopped to see the person quietly carrying burdens that never belonged to her alone. I accepted your kindness so naturally that I forgot. Kindness is never something anyone owes another person." The breeze gently stirred the rose branches between them. Olivia listened without judgment, her expression remaining peaceful. "You never intended to hurt me," she answered softly. Nathan shook his head.
"No."
"But I still did." Those words lingered in the quiet morning air. Olivia walked toward the fountain before sitting upon the weathered stone edge, inviting Nathan to join her with a small gesture. For several moments, they simply watched sunlight dance across the clear water. Finally, she spoke again. When I planted these roses years ago, many people told me they would never bloom because the soil had been neglected for too long. But flowers do not spend their time asking why they were forgotten. They simply bloom when someone chooses to care for them. Nathan understood she was speaking about far more than flowers. Can trust return after being neglected? He asked honestly. Olivia smiled gently as she looked across the colorful garden. Trust grows the same way these roses do. Not because of one beautiful morning, but because someone chooses to care for it every single day. Nathan quietly nodded. He knew there were no perfect words capable of repairing years of emotional distance. Only consistent actions could accomplish that. As the palace bells echoed across the awakening kingdom, he stood beside Olivia instead of walking ahead toward the castle. Together they slowly followed the garden path beneath blooming trees while servants passing through the courtyard paused in quiet surprise. For the first time, the Alpha King was not simply accompanied by the Omega who had always walked behind him. He chose to walk beside her, understanding that true respect is revealed not only through spoken gratitude, but through the place someone is given in both daily life and in the heart. Later that week, the Great Hall of Mooncrest Citadel welcomed representatives from every village, guild, and royal household for the annual assembly of the kingdom. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, painting the polished marble floor with brilliant shades of gold and sapphire. Nathan Walker stood before the ancient throne wearing his formal black cloak embroidered with silver, yet there was something different in the quiet confidence upon his face. The council expected announcements regarding trade, harvests, and preparations for the coming season. Instead, Nathan slowly stepped away from the throne itself, choosing to stand at the center of the chamber, where every citizen could see him clearly. Captain Lucas Harper stood nearby, while the elderly librarian, the palace physician, the head gardener, the chief archivist, and dozens of servants filled the front rows. Olivia Brooks entered quietly from the western doors wearing the same modest ivory dress and charcoal gray cloak she had always worn. She had no expectation of standing before the assembly. She intended only to observe before returning to the gardens once the meeting concluded. Nathan looked toward her with calm sincerity before addressing the entire kingdom. For many years, he began, I believed great achievements were built only by those whose names appeared in official records. I have learned that some of the greatest acts of service are never announced, never celebrated, and never requested. The vast hall became completely silent. Nathan continued with steady conviction. There is someone among us whose kindness has strengthened this kingdom more times than any report could ever record. She restored forgotten gardens, preserved our history, cared for our servants, prepared aid for struggling villages, organized our archives, supported our physicians, and quietly carried burdens that belonged to all of us rather than herself. Every eye slowly turned toward Olivia. She lowered her gaze, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. Nathan gently motioned for her to join him. After a brief hesitation, she walked across the marble floor while whispers of quiet recognition spread throughout the hall. Many people suddenly remembered moments when she had helped them without expecting anything in return. Nathan waited until she stood beside him before speaking again. I accepted her kindness as though it were ordinary. I thanked the results while failing to truly see the person behind them. That was my mistake, and it is one I will never allow myself to repeat. His voice carried through every corner of the chamber with complete honesty. Olivia Brooks, before this council and before every citizen of Mooncrest Kingdom, I thank you for every unseen sacrifice, every quiet act of compassion, and every day you chose to make life better for others even when no one was watching. A long moment of respectful silence followed before the elderly gardener slowly began applauding. The palace physician joined him. Then the librarians, the servants, the village elders, the royal guards, and finally the entire assembly rose to their feet. The applause filled the great hall not with excitement alone, but with heartfelt gratitude. Olivia looked around in quiet disbelief, her blue eyes shining with emotion she struggled to hide. Nathan did not reach for her hand or ask anything of her. Instead, he simply stepped half a pace to the side, so she stood beside him rather than behind him. It was a small gesture, yet everyone understood its meaning. From that day forward, Nathan announced a new royal tradition requiring every department of the palace to recognize acts of quiet service regardless of rank or title. As the bronze bell echoed across Mooncrest Kingdom and sunlight illuminated the ancient banners overhead, Olivia realized that the greatest reward for a lifetime of sacrifice was never applause itself. It was finally being seen exactly as she had always been. As spring slowly gave way to early summer, Mooncrest Kingdom began to reflect the quiet transformation that had first taken root inside two hearts. The western gardens bloomed more brilliantly than anyone could remember, not because they had suddenly become more beautiful, but because every flower now received the same patient care that had always defined Olivia Brooks. This time, however, she no longer worked alone. Almost every morning before the first council meeting, Nathan Walker walked beside her through the winding stone paths carrying a watering can or a basket of fresh seedlings, speaking less as a king giving instructions and more as a man learning to appreciate the quiet moments he had once overlooked. Palace servants smiled whenever they saw them together, not because grand declarations had been made, but because respect had gradually replaced distance. Nathan kept the promise he had spoken before the royal assembly. Every month, he personally reviewed reports highlighting acts of kindness performed by ordinary citizens, believing that a kingdom became strongest when compassion received the same attention as power. Servants who had quietly worked for decades found themselves honored beside generals and advisors. Young apprentices discovered that humility could earn as much admiration as remarkable talent. Throughout Mooncrest Kingdom, people slowly began noticing one another in ways they never had before. Olivia continued living as she always had. She still visited the infirmary before sunrise, tended the gardens with gentle hands, repaired books in the library whenever needed, and quietly prepared supplies for distant villages before difficult seasons arrived. The only difference was that now, whenever someone thanked her, she accepted their gratitude with a peaceful smile instead of quietly stepping away before anyone noticed. She had finally learned that allowing kindness to be appreciated did not diminish its sincerity. One warm evening, Nathan invited Olivia to the highest terrace overlooking the entire kingdom. The setting sun bathed the rolling hills, rivers, forests, and distant villages in soft golden light, while hundreds of white birds glided peacefully across the open sky. They stood together at the stone balcony without speaking for several moments, listening to the gentle breeze moving through the royal banners above them. Nathan finally broke the comfortable silence. For many years, I believed leading meant always standing in front of everyone else, he admitted quietly. You taught me that the strongest leaders also learn to stand beside the people who quietly carry others. Olivia looked across the peaceful kingdom before answering with her familiar, gentle voice. Every flower in the garden blooms because countless unseen roots work together beneath the soil. People are not very different. Nathan smiled, understanding those words more deeply than ever before. The bronze bell echoed across Mooncrest Citadel as evening settled gently over the kingdom. Its familiar sound no longer reminded him of responsibility alone. It reminded him to notice the quiet acts of love that often changed lives without asking for recognition. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the distant mountains, Nathan and Olivia slowly walked back toward the palace side by side, their footsteps perfectly matched along the ancient stone path. Behind them, the western garden swayed peacefully beneath the evening breeze, every blooming rose standing as a silent reminder that the greatest sacrifices are never truly forgotten once they are finally seen, and that the deepest love is not measured by grand promises or royal titles, but by the countless ordinary moments in which two hearts choose gratitude, understanding, and kindness again and again, until those quiet choices become the lasting foundation of an entire kingdom.